Welcome to the demo for Sprint 4 of SolrMARC's Indexing and Performance Work Cycle. I'm Christina Harlow, the product owner for this effort, and we are going to go through what we got achieved in this last week, or Sprint 4. Really quickly, before we get started, I want to call out our team members. So acting as technical lead for this effort is Chris Beer, and then we have as software engineers Shelley Doljack, Jessie Keck, Jack Reed, Camille Villa, and Jruby. Winjet, yes. Key stakeholders in this effort are Alyssa Hefele and Sarah Seastone. Gary Geisler and Jennifer Vine are consultant UX designers on this effort. Stu Steidman is our DLSS direct liaison, and Kam Chan is our ops liaison. So. With that stated, I want to go over a little bit what our goals were for Sprint 4. So in Sprint 4, we were hoping to do actually a fair amount of side work that had piled up during this work cycle so far, and we'll be showing some of that side work that we did in the first part of this video. For those who aren't regular DLSS participants, what this means is when other issues come up while we're working on something, it's stuff that's not directly related to our work cycle, but there are bugs that we need to fix rather soon for whatever reason. So we figured out how to get that into our planning process and to take it out in one fell swoop, instead of having it pull people away all the time and you have a lot of context shifting and issues with keeping on track of what you're doing. So we're going to start by going through a fair amount of side work that we had to go through in the past week. We're also very, very close to finishing the trajectification of the universe. So we're going to go through some of the really interesting, really hard problems that came out of us migrating our SolrMARC and SolrMARC's indexing code to using Traject, which is an open code base for indexing MARC data to Solr. And then we also had this week where we gathered super users, SolrMARC super users evaluation feedback. This is based on our desire to try to move to an upgraded version of Solr, but being aware that that had some effects on some of our relevancy returns. We had an identified group of super users that did evaluation last week for us. So we'll talk a little bit briefly about what we got from that. And we'll end with a quick design architectural sketch of what we're thinking about for in-user monitoring, which is one of the goals of this work cycle that we really haven't touched so far. So that's what our goals were for this work cycle, and that's what we'll be going through in this video. Now I'm going to hand it off to our sort of side work walkthrough group. Jack, would you like to start? And if so, would you like to share your screen?
Yep, I'll start. I'm not going to share my screen.
Okay.
Last week, the team worked on 7 Vatican exhibits tickets. We completed all of these in, I think, less than 2 days. And I'm not going to provide a whole bunch more context than that because it's probably confusing to a lot of people or unclear. But we accomplished all the issues and should be set for the rest of this work cycle.
And just for a little bit more context, Vatican was a project that occurred for a part of this team right before or leading up to this, and there was some wrap-up stuff that needed to be done. So great, we got it, guys, got it done on track. Okay, and then Camille, you're going to talk about weekly updates. Would you like to share your screen?
Yes.
All right, so let me stop. All right.
1 second.
No problem, take your time.
Share screen. Oh, great. Cool. Okay. So, as Christina mentioned, though the team is focused on one project at a time, the Access team does have these other applications that have to stay up and running and up to date. So this is just a quick preview of our weekly dependency update process. So we try to make this as automated as possible. So we have a couple of scripts that'll run through all our repos, run update functions on them, make pull requests for us, grab those pull requests from GitHub, give us some information about major, minor, and patch versions, and then we can plop those in the spreadsheet. And then we as a team, every Monday, kind of divide up this work of reviewing these PRs and ultimately deploying them. So speaking about the rest of our portfolio, we also worked on some issues and exhibits this week. So we're always thankful for curators who can really push the limits of our software. So we found a bug in exhibits where very long feature pages could not be saved. So this is great. We had the opportunity to also push this fix upstream to Spotlight, so other institutions can take advantage of this now expanded capacity for feature pages. And then we have also been looking into the possibility of using Mirador for external IIIF resources. Unfortunately, this problem is hairier than one might think because of differences in manifests between institutions. So we also have this spreadsheet for kind of keeping track of manifest validity and sort of known problem, known challenges. Okay, yeah, that's it in exhibits land.
Cool, thank you. So I'm gonna take the screen back. So that's a helpful walkthrough, and just to reiterate, the dependency updates happen for the Access portfolio at least every Monday, so that's something that's sort of ongoing side work. We decided just to throw it in here as part of this. We had to clean up a lot of stuff this week, so it's something that's nice for stakeholders to be aware of. And then finally, Shib stuff. So we were Shibalizing all the things. Cam, would you like to share anything?
Sure. So in the ops team, there's an effort to Shibalize all our WebAuth servers, and there's a handful of services that affect some of the members of this team that would potentially compete for the time against this work cycle. So the last two that we, Jessie and the ops teams we're working on are stacks and request. For request, Rob Smith's been working with Jessie on that, and he's still waiting for the LDAP authorization to come through. And with stacks, last week I was working with a recommendation from UIT in how to bypass a load balance specific deployment. We used to use a WebAuth cache, and that particular cache can be copied to each server. But with the Shibboleth, we couldn't do the same thing. So what they recommended to do was to create MySQL databases. So I had to spin up a couple of servers and configure a couple of MySQL databases. And for production, we deployed stacks with Shibboleth last Friday. And so far, no one's complained about it yet. So if that continues, this week we'll push it out and make it officially a production environment. So
great. And the Shibboleth work was prioritized for side work because we needed to have it done by a deadline given to us by University IT. So. And
that deadline is August 31st.
And we're just under it! Yay! Great. Okay, so that was, again, that's all work that was external to the goals of this work cycle, but we had to get done this week. Thank you for walking through that. Now we're going to go into the goals that are specific to this work cycle. MARC and MOD's Trajectification of the universe. Shelley, would you like to get us started? And are you going to share something on your screen?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so one of the questions that we had last week regarding moving stuff to Traject is if we can move some of the processing, what I'm calling post-processing that we do as part of the export out of Symfony, and move that to Traject. And so one of the questions that we had, well, that I had was how much time does this post-processing actually take, and when we're doing a full export of MARC records out of Symfony versus not having any post-processing. And one of the first steps I did to answer these questions was to update our documentation of what it is that we're doing when we're exporting data out of Symfony, and in particular, what are the post-processing stuff that we're doing here. So some of the stuff that we do is we add a date timestamp to a data field. We check that the C key is in the 001 field because that's used as a unique ID for Solr. And then if there's any invalid MARC leaders in our Symphony records. And after analyzing that a little further, there are some things that we can move to Traject if we wanted to, and then there's some things that we wouldn't be able to move, which I've documented here. And then, so the next question was, how much time does it really take? How much longer does it really take to do any of this post-processing at all? And so I took the log files that we keep for the full dumps that the past 3 full dumps that we did, and plotted out on this chart here the different dumps that we did, one in February, July, August, and then a special one that I did where I removed all of the post-processing that we do, and then see how long it takes for each of these steps. These first 4 steps here are kind of like the selection, when we're selecting records and then filtering out records that shouldn't be sent to SearchWorks, etc. And that takes, timing-wise, about 3 hours added all together, 3 to 4 hours. And then the part where we're actually dumping records, doing the post-processing, converting them into MARC binary format, that ends up taking just between 12 and 13 hours every time we do it. And for some reason, when we ran it without the post-processing, it took longer. And I'd have to say maybe it's because we did it during a weekday. And normally we do these full dumps on a weekend, so people are actively making changes to the records. And then the next thing I wanted to quickly go through is more charts here on a breakdown of the post-processing. We're creating about like 24 different MARC files that contain about 500,000 records each in them. And this kind of plots out the average duration per number of records in a file, and we kind of like cluster around between 20 and 45 minutes per file. And then the colors correspond to which of the dumps there were. And so I guess in conclusion is that maybe we should just keep what we're doing with the post-processing and not really move any of that to Traject based on this data. So
cool. Yeah. Thank you for that. And that was helpful because we're looking to see how we actually change the triggering of the indexing pipeline outside of just moving the mapping of the fields over. So this is really helpful information to know what we can or cannot move to that pipeline. All right, next is Jack. Are you ready to talk about the Jruby discoveries?
Yep.
And would you like to share your screen or no?
I don't have anything to share, really.
Okay, that's cool.
So we've been doing different runs of the Traject code using a Ruby interpreter and also a Jruby. Jruby is a Java implementation of the Ruby interpreter. It has performance benefits. We've been running into some issues for running Jruby in production, and so I've been over the past several days going through those problems and trying to diagnose and resolve them. To still no avail, unfortunately.
Great, thank you. We definitely want to try to get Jruby working because it would be that much faster, but yeah, there are a lot of concerns that have actually been kicked up to a couple different community spaces, so that's really helpful to see. Chris, would you like to talk about difference in length? Do you have something to share?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we started the trajectification, we started by converting the SolrMARC Java code we had and the test suite that came with it. To date, we finished all but 3 or 4 fields, which was enough to move on to the next step where we actually compare what we get out of Traject with what we were getting out of SolrMARC, knowing that there are probably edge cases in our data that were not accounted for in the test suite. And were there ever, is the short version. We've discovered along the way places where we thought we saw a pattern in the way we're looking at data, but no such pattern existed. An example of this is when we dive into subfields, especially for titles. We often retrieve subfields A through V, I believe. But in certain types of titles, we also retrieve subfield W. Through this process, we were able to catch errors like that. We're still working through a few remaining issues. Let's see. Some of them are code problems that we're going to have to deal with. Some of them are potential data errors, and some of them are things we probably will decide to live with because it's as good or better than what we have in SolrMARC. I will show you a couple examples of this. The first is an example of a data problem we have with a MARC record where the SolrMARC code was retrieving this very nice looking full title for a record, including whatever that is, including the title in the author sort field.
Chris, could you see that?
There's a limit to how much I can zoom in. So, unfortunately, in Traject land, we no longer have this first part of the title, I believe, and we've had to do some analysis of the MARC records, and what we've discovered is that 245, instead of a subfield A, we have a subfield random Unicode character, which SolrMARC happened to deal with because it was just looking for any field that had any non-numeric information in it. Traject, we've been a little more picky, and we assumed it would be A through Z. So that was not the case. There's probably 100 or so records that have this sort of error, including some that have a totally blank subfield value, which is interesting. Let's see. A second sort of error is something like this record, where SolrMARC outputted the vernacular subject other search field with a trailing space, and we've stripped the trailing space away. This is an example of an error that's not actually harmful to our users. In fact, might be better depending on what context this gets used in. There's some other examples of where white space has been a challenge in some of our compound fields, like our enrolled field, where there's some internal white space that may or may not be an issue, but we have to deal with. Finally, there's been a class of errors that have been bugs we've incidentally fixed as we've gone through because we're re-implementing what we thought was happening. And in some cases, that turns out not to be true. An example of this, which probably several people in this room have been on an email thread about, is an issue we ran into with government docs and their classifications, where we discovered and were banging our heads for several days about why a document that looked clearly like a California government doc was classified as an other government doc in current SearchWorks. And that led to a series of email threads trying to figure out why this was the case. In the end, it turned out there was a bug in our Java code that was causing it not to handle the 086 fields correctly. And for the sake of parity with what we have right now, we've conveniently reintroduced that bug, just so we can prove that we're producing the same sorts of documents. And then hopefully we'll quickly fix the problem. So that's where we are right now. I think our error rate is probably down around certainly less than 0.1% of our documents. It's probably even lower than that. So things are looking pretty good, especially when most of the errors are of this white space variety.
Great.
And the remaining work for Traject are 3 fields that have been giving us a lot of grief. And they are our preferred barcode field, our item display field, and our shelf key fields, which are used in SearchWorks to drive the browse nearby feature, among other things. The issue we've been having with them is call numbers are hard and they're very difficult to parse and parse correctly. And we found a lot of code in SolrMARC to try to deal with it and try to deal with edge cases, sometimes producing new and interesting bugs. Our solution to this in the end was we gave up and are trying to re-implement it essentially from scratch, looking at what the outputs are and what we know we want to have. So there's exciting times ahead for that. But we're very close now. We've come up with a couple breakthroughs to bring it closer to what we have with SolrMARC. And hopefully in the next couple days we'll reach full parity.
Great. Thank you so much. So that is overview of where Traject sits. You can see we're wrapping up really quickly on that. Something else that happened last week. So as part of trying to move to a modern version of Solr, current Solr index is using Solr4. We're trying to move eventually to Solr7, but we knew that that had changes in the underlying algorithms within the Solr code itself, like outside of our control in that. So to try to assess if the changes were harmful or not and to what degree, we instituted a very lightweight process to identify some super users, give them a week and say, here are 2 environments. One has the production Solr version and data. The other one has the Solr version we're aiming for and the exact same data. Can you please perform your searches and let us know if there's a difference? That was last week. And we did get the feedback. So very roughly grouped, because I haven't been able to look at this too much today yet, but we got about 71 responses, or we got 71 responses total. And you can see the majority are status quo. Yay, so the majority of them are fine. We got a couple that were better or good, something was fixed. We got some minor, there was quite a bit, relatively speaking, so less than 10, but a number that were issues with ordering, so the ranking of the results. But we got, when I say minor ordering, it means it was noted by the super user that the ordering changed, but they said, oh, but this is okay though. It's reasonable and it makes sense. We did get some that were, and this is where I need to figure out a better ontology for my review mechanism, but we got a couple that they were like, hey, this is broken. Oh, but it's also broken in production. So we counted those as like, well, at least we have parity and we can highlight this as a ticket to fix in the future. We got a couple that were slightly worse. You can see again, this is like 2 that are actually 1 that is slightly worse. And I think this was a series title that was particularly problematic. A lot that were status quo. A couple were uncertain. We got the feedback and we need to follow up with those users to say, is this a bad thing? We see that you noted a difference. Is it a good or a bad thing? And then for the ones that are just straight out worse that we need to fix, the majority of them are CJK parsing. And again, there's 5 out of 71. So there's some that are CJK parsing, a couple of them, there are already some ideas on how to fix it. And then some that just need researching around ranking, title, and ordering. And a lot of those are related to series. So overall, it was very good, and we're getting to the niggly hard parts of some Japanese character parsing, some dealing with titles like nature or chronicle. Yeah. But overall, very good response, and we did get some positive responses where they're like, oh, this is actually much better, which is good to hear. So that's the super users review. Where do I want to be? I want to be here. The last thing we're going to chat about in this demo really quickly is something that's been a stretch goal for a couple of weeks now, and we really need to start laying down some plans for it, is getting an in-user dashboard or public monitoring endpoint where someone can say, oh, it looks like SearchWorks is messing up. What's the status of it? We've been trying to get to it. We just haven't been able to make the time in the work cycle so far. So we had a brief design discussion on Friday. And Jack, would you like to share some stuff on that?
Yep. So I'm sharing my screen. Oh, cool. So the team, Drew, Camille, and myself met on Friday to discuss kind of what a status dashboard would look like. We came up with a list of questions, kind of concerns, different options, deployment strategies, and tooling around that, and created a document hopefully the team can use in story planning, in story time and sprint planning, to meet kind of the basic needs, but also think about kind of long-term, what are kind of the, based off the user requirements and kind of the understanding of what's needed, what's kind of a short-term, long-term, and kind of MVP and what can be built on. So we've kind of tossed around a lot of different ideas and think we have a good way forward. So that's really all we have to share about that.
Yeah, great, thank you. And we just want to make sure we called it out so you know that that's one of those goals that we really haven't made much traction on yet. So we did start like the design and work on getting that moving forward. So that is our demo for Sprint 4. Coming up in the next week, we're hoping to really wrap up and put a bow on the Trajectification code migration and start acting on the super users' feedback to figure out how we can move forward with moving our Solr version to a modern version. And think about and start implementing that Traject pipeline in its context. So getting MARC records from where and getting triggered when and running to what index. Thank you. If you have questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments below this video or contact any of the team members via Slack or email.